We often treat meditation as a psychological escape hatch. It is a calm retreat from the noise of daily life to find inner peace. This therapeutic definition is structurally incomplete. By retreating inward to soothe our anxieties, we inadvertently sever our ties to the outside world, deepening the very isolation and systemic alienation we are trying to escape. Biblical meditation functions as an active architectural mechanism for cultivating sacred alterity. Sacred alterity describes the intentional cultivation of an inner reality set strictly apart. It requires severing our deep-seated entanglements with the world's demands to orient the self exclusively toward the divine. This creates a unique structural tension. An immaterial internal discipline generates a highly resilient, outward-facing ethical reality. To trace how this becomes a tangible force, we must see how it pushes back against societal homogenization through union with Christ. This specific discipline provides the structural foundation required for resisting the relentless pressure to be fragmented and commodified by modern society. To grasp why this internal architecture is required, we have to examine the environment it pushes back against, the modern condition as mapped by 20th century critical theory. The sociologist and philosopher Theodor Adorno spent his career dissecting the structural failures of modern society. Alongside his collaborator, Max Horkheimer, he published The Dialectic of Enlightenment, a text that diagnosed a distinct pathology in the Western world. They identified the dominant operating system of our time as instrumental reason. This is a logic that prioritizes absolute efficiency, measurement, and control, extending its reach far beyond economics into every conceivable sphere of daily life. Under this framework, individuals are stripped of intrinsic value and compressed into mere functions. The culture industry manufactures our identities, replacing genuine individuality with homogenized consumption. Any true otherness is immediately suppressed or efficiently co-opted, smoothing out rough edges to sell rebellion back to us. The resulting psychological landscape is bleak. We are left with a deep, pervasive sense of fragmentation and the loss of any authentic core identity. This is the precise definition of worldly alienation. It is the condition of an individual whose inner life is entirely dictated by external, overarching forces, rather than intrinsic, self-directed values. Because the administered world absorbs nearly all internal critiques, resisting this totalizing system requires an anchor point situated completely outside of its logic. Escaping this systemic homogenization requires orienting the mind toward a specific counterforce, sacred alterity. The theologian Karl Barth provides the necessary ontological framework to understand this concept. Barth insisted on the concept of Ganz Andersheit, the holy otherness of God. This defines a divine reality that is not merely the highest peak of human potential, but an entity standing in an absolute, infinite qualitative difference to humanity. Because this God is entirely self-defined and operates in total freedom, the divine nature inherently resists the metrics of instrumental reason. It cannot be quantified or commodified. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas helps translate this vast theological difference into a practical ethical imperative. Levinas argued that a genuine encounter with the irreducible face of the other inherently shatters our illusion of self-sufficiency. It presents a demand that we cannot fully grasp or possess. When this irreducible other is the divine, the encounter violently disrupts our centered ego. This distinct reality strikes the individual, severing compliance with the administered world's logic. This disruption produces a primordial ethical obligation, redirecting focus outward into a required response. The subject enters a state of sacred alienation. They become distinct from worldly norms because they anchor themselves to the radical otherness of the divine. Orienting toward the holy other is an ontological severing from the culture industry. By anchoring to something that cannot be commodified, the construction of genuine selfhood finally becomes possible. If the modern problem is a system that commodifies every external action, the solution must reside in a space the system cannot reach. The spiritual discipline found in the Psalms shifts the focus to this internal, non-marketable reality. To see how this works, we must contrast it with the historical baseline. The Book of Numbers details an extensive system of physical, material sacrifices, grain, burnt offerings, and livestock. Looking at the surviving texts of these ancient laws, the requirements for worship were defined by strict quotas and rigid physical parameters to measure oblation. The Psalms, particularly Psalm 104, completely restructure this dynamic. The text establishes that the internal posture of the soul, its meditation, joy, and focused devotion, constitutes the acceptable material offering. This framework drafts the mind and heart as active agents of sacrifice. They are no longer passive recipients of grace, but the primary site of liturgical work. Meditation becomes a process of deliberate refinement. It actively separates the core of the self that yearns for the divine from the dross of worldly commodification. Maintaining this focus requires a constant refusal to let the self be scattered by modern anxieties and market forces. The Psalms move the site of sacrifice from the external altar to the internal landscape, demanding the construction of a hardened counter-reality within the individual. But this creates a serious theoretical problem. How does a purely immaterial, internal posture actually materialize into a tangible force in the world without reverting back to physical, flesh and blood sacrifices? If this sacred alterity stays locked inside the mind, it quickly rots into spiritual elitism. A purely internal devotion is just another flavor of the isolation Adorno and Horkheimer warned about. The theological text bridges this gap between internal state and external reality through a specific mechanism, Christological union. Christ serves as the ultimate embodiment of alterity, a human existence completely set apart for the divine will, whose specific physical sacrifice directly addressed the root of all systemic alienation. The Apostle Paul argues in Galatians that the power to project this alterity outward does not originate from our own fragile willpower. It flows entirely from the indwelling of Christ within the practitioner. This union acts as an engine. It takes the internally consecrated heart, bypasses market manipulation, and forcefully shoots that orientation outward into the physical world. As these actions strike the surrounding system, they generate localized zones where the administered world's calculated logic simply dissolves. True materialization is impossible through human effort alone. It requires the transformative power of the ultimate other, operating through the individual to override the totalizing grid of society. Once materialized, this sacred alterity leaves distinct, observable footprints in modern society, providing a direct counter-narrative to the culture industry. We see it first in actions of service. Reaching out to the marginalized and pursuing rigorous justice directly subverts a system built on instrumental efficiency and profit. Second, we see it in words of witness. Articulating divine truth introduces an authentic vocabulary that directly dismantles the manufactured narratives designed to keep populations compliant. Third, it manifests in creative expression. Art, music, and writing from a consecrated core offer living bursts of complex creation that defy homogenized mass production. But the entire architecture rests on a critical vulnerability: the absolute demand for strict inner authenticity. If these external outputs, the service, the witness, the art, are performed to secure status or human validation, the structure collapses. The actions instantly regress into self-commodification, proving Adorno's exact point. The internal sacrifice of meditation serves as the firmest possible grounding for the self. By anchoring to the radical otherness of the divine, we secure the only stable identity capable of breaking the machinery of a homogenized world.